who is making his way up. It'll be much briefer, maybe 12 minutes or so. Hopefully we can have one, maybe two questions from the floor, if we have time, and then we'll go to Minister Haidu. So with that, Minister Mendicino.
Thank you. Thanks. Hello. Good afternoon. Bon après-midi and Kwe. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am pleased to be joining you today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I also want to begin with a sincere expression of gratitude to all of the elders, the regional chiefs and chiefs in the room today, as well as, of course, National Chief Archibald for the invitation. It is indeed a very special honor to be joining you for the Special Chiefs Assembly. It's an honor
for me to be part of your Special Chief Assembly these last few days. I had the privilege of meeting a lot of you. In most cases, we had to continue the conversation that we had lunch on your territory during the last year.
But before I move into them, I would like to just say how grateful I am, in addition to acknowledging the elders, the chiefs up here, to all of you for welcoming me into your conversations this week, into your communities over the last number of months. I think that in addition to talking about the substance of the way in which we are moving forward with reconciliation and public safety and protecting Indigenous peoples, and the way that we are doing that through a wide range of initiatives, that at first we talk about why we need to do this work. And as I reflect about the disproportionate overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in our federal incarceration facilities, when I think about the disproportionate number of Indigenous peoples who are victims of violent crime, the high number of Indigenous peoples that are have been victimized by gun violence, and the disproportionate number of Indigenous peoples who, for those very reasons, lack confidence in our law enforcement. It is imperative now more than ever that we continue to press forward with reforms in a way that is respectful of reconciliation. And it is painfully clear to me from the conversations that I've had, the visits to James Smith Cree Nation, being able to meet face-to-face with the families of the victims, and indeed the victims and the survivors themselves, what is at stake. If we don't change the way we approach the reforms that are necessary to our institutions and law enforcement, we will be condemned to repeat history. And that is precisely what you have seen and we have seen together when we listen to the elders, when we listen to all of you today, when we look into the eyes of the young generation coming up. The only way we're going to break that cycle of intergenerational trauma is if we move forward in a way that is anchored in the values of trust, respect, and the inherent right that you have to self-determine when it comes to public safety. And that must be the point of departure of the work that I am committed to in my capacity as Minister of Public Safety. And it is also important that as we do this work together, nation to nation, as we do this work together in a way that is respectful of those values, we must bring together, along with us, Canadians. And that requires education. For Canadians, reconciliation is seen through the lens of tragedy, often, through residential schools, through MMIWG, through James Smith Cree Nation, and more recently through in Winnipeg. And it encompasses so much more than that. And so I would just say that we need to be sure we do not ever forget what it is that motivates the work. And I certainly say on behalf of myself and the government that it is the need to do better. And we are committed to doing that. So let me now just highlight a few of the important and tangible things that we are looking to work on together. First, on First Nations policing. I know that you will be aware that the government has allocated a historic amount of federal funding, about $860 million. We are accelerating the rolling out of those funds directly into your communities. This is good news. It's positive news. But I want to acknowledge to you that as we transition away from a programs-based approach to a co-developed legislative approach that recognizes that Indigenous policing is an essential service, that we will need more. And we will need more, and we will need to be sure that we are working in conjunction with our provincial and territorial partners, which is something that we are obviously committed to doing. Over the past number of months, I have been engaging with a wide variety of First Nations under the AFN IPP, from Six Nations to Wendake to the Siksika Nation, as well as leaders like the New Brunswick Region Chiefs, Saskatchewan's Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, and many others. Nous accomplirons ce travail important à l'aide d'une approche à trois volets. Faire progresser les...
We will have a three-pronged approach to stabilize and broaden the First Nation police services program and for the Inuit also, and we will work with the individual community to set up new police services.
Advancing the co-developed legislation, stabilizing and expanding the First Nations and Inuit policing program, and working with individual communities to establish new police services. So firstly, on the legislation, we are meaningfully engaging in a co-developed process to develop legislation that will recognize and acknowledge that First Nations policing is an essential service. Nous sommes actuellement en train de co-développer une législation qui...
We are actually developing a code that recognizes the police services of First Nation as an essential services.
Co-developing with all of you as an equal partner. Our work is well underway, and I look forward to introducing it as soon as we can, because I know throughout my conversations we have been asked, indeed, when will we see that legislation tabled? And I'm committed, and I know the leadership here is committed to moving forward with that as soon as we can in a way that is respectful of the principles of co-development and reconciliation. Secondly, we are stabilizing and expanding the First Nations and Inuit policing program. This begins with over $500 million, as I've already said, from last year's budget to address immediate needs and to close gaps. This can mean adding new officers and services, enhancing police infrastructure, and expanding the program. And just last month, we announced that the FNIPP will expand in Nunavut. Thirdly, we are working with individual communities to establish new First Nations police services. These negotiations are as diverse as First Nations are. Every community is different, and from those, we must be respectful of the long-established traditions, languages, culture, and history, so that as we do this work, we are doing it in a way that is empowering of Indigenous-led initiatives. We are meeting communities. We are meeting you where you are. And our plan is making progress. Last month, we announced the creation of a new self-administered force for the Siksika Nation for the first new First Nations police service in 14 years, which indeed is positive, but we need to do more of that with all of you. While policing attracts the most attention, work on Indigenous-led approaches to public safety is underway across the public safety portfolio. And when it comes to corrections, The harsh reality is that Canada's prisons do not look like Canada's population. Indigenous people account for more than 1/4 of all inmates, and for women, it's half. And in some regions, it's even as high as 80 to 90%. There are myriad causes, from systemic racism to the painful legacies of violence, neglect, and colonialism. And this is simply unacceptable. And we're going to do something about it. La surreprésentation de peuples autochtones.
The overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Canadian correctional services is simply unacceptable.
Commissioner Kelly of the Correctional Services of Canada. In particular, I have instructed her to create a new position of Deputy Commissioner for Indigenous Corrections, a direct response to the calls for justice from Canada's National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. This role will ensure appropriate attention and accountability for Indigenous issues and address overrepresentation. And finally, we're expanding culturally appropriate programming, and in particular, I want to note the expansion of Healing Lodges, which incorporates Indigenous values and traditions, from teachings to elders to time in nature. Before I leave you today, I want to touch upon a few other areas of progress. When it comes to the border, we know that you were here before it was. And in June, I joined the annual meeting of the Jay Treaty Border Alliance in Windsor, meeting leaders from both sides of that line. And this fall, we convened the first meeting of the Jay Treaty Working Group. Supporting Indigenous-led approaches to the public safety portfolio means supporting great work on the ground. And that's why the $250 million Building Safer Communities Fund indeed does prioritize Indigenous communities so that we can prevent crime and harm before it starts. A portion of this funding will continue to be rolled out to communities, and last summer I had the privilege of joining Chief Day and others at Six Nations to announce the first agreement supporting programs that help those who are at most risk to make the right choices and choose the right path. And finally, we continue to participate in important fora like the tripartite justice tables for FPT ministers' forums and others. There is so much more work to do, but I am very grateful again for the opportunity to have met with you this week, to have been able to address this Assembly, and of course to be able to continue to do these reforms so that we can walk that path of reconciliation together. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you. We're open for one question.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Minister Mendocino. I was going to take one question. Chiefs, we have 3 ministers and the Minister at 4 o'clock. We were behind because of important agenda items. So I was going to take one, but I've seen 2. We're together? Okay, so I'll give you 3 minutes between the 2 of you, and then I'll get a response, and then we'll go to the next minister. So if you can restart the timer, please. Microphone number 1, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Deborah Baker, and I'm proxy for the Chaunath Indian Band, Copeak's Judy Wilson, who had to leave. And so thank you, Minister, for being here. I think you just met my son, Cal Salem, earlier, and I saw a picture. But what I really wanted to say to you is one of our chiefs earlier talked about reform and to change the language to quality of life for all people, especially for our Indigenous people here in Canada. The second thing I wanted to mention is we do not feel safe in our communities or in any city in Canada. We feel that we could be a target, which happened to my dear friend Laura when her son was shot by 3 RCMP officers in Campbell River. His name is Jared Londes, and his aunt is sitting right here, Gladys. On that note, Mr. Minister, I would like to turn it over to our respected leader, Indigenous leader here at the forum, Penny Kerrigan, OSIAM.
Hi, I'm Penny Kerrigan, and I'm proxy for Duffy Edgars, our Chief Counselor in Old Masset. How is the Department of Public Safety engaging Indigenous women, particularly matriarchs and grassroots title holders, on implementing the implementation of UNDRIP, especially in light of the serial killings in Winnipeg and the suspected hot capping of Indigenous women in the downtown east side, where this continues to happen uninvestigated. And hot capping is the intentional injection of illegal drugs into a woman. And we're talking about 13-year-old girls that are dying of drugs, elders that never did drugs. Like last week, one died and was a worker at the Aboriginal Mother Center that never did drugs and was found dead last Saturday. Yeah. And there was no investigation, and there will be no investigation to her death. So that's my question.
Thank you, Miigwech, for the question. I believe that there is a way in which the questions are overlapping, in the sense that the quality of life for all Indigenous peoples has been harmed by many of the challenges that I addressed in my remarks that are baked into our institutions as a result of colonialism, as a result of the lack of respect, lack of trust, lack of integrity shown by institutions and governments towards Indigenous peoples, and indeed to stop that endless cycle, to prevent another Winnipeg, another James Smith Cree Nation, another MMIWG, another residential schools. It has to begin by showing fidelity to those values, by being faithful to those principles. And part of that means listening to and working with elders and Indigenous women elders who have the knowledge, I mean, one of the things that I hear in my conversations all the time is, Minister, we know our communities. We know where the challenges are. We have the wisdom to pass on. What we don't have is that partnership with you and with government and with institutions. And so I know, for example, in a conversation that I had yesterday with the BC Justice Council, that they are creating justice centers. And that is a testament to the leadership that we see on the ground. I think we need to, again, meet you where you are, be flexible, be agile, inquire into how we can create safe, inclusive spaces where we can educate, where we can prevent, where we can show respect towards Indigenous language and culture and history and tradition and pass that on. And I think that is the way in which, we stop this endless cycle of trauma and loss. And that's precisely what I'm committed to doing with you. It takes a lot of different forms. And there are a lot of different vehicles through which we're providing that support to you, the FNIPP, the process of co-developing legislation. I didn't mention it in my remarks, but the creation of a piece of legislation in C20 that will ensure that there's more civilian review and oversight of the RCMP and the CBSA, so that there can be that confidence and trust. Thank you for the question, Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Chiefs. Minister Marc Mendicino, of course, is Minister of Public Safety Canada. And I'm going to ask Minister Mendicino over on the side. We have a gift from National Chief Roseanne Archibald. So, Miigwech, thank you. We'll go over to the next minister.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Minister Mendicino. So now I would like to invite the Minister Haidu, l'honorable ministre Patty Haidu, la ministre des Services.
The Right Honourable Haidu of the Indigenous Canada Ministry.
So thank you very much, Minister Haidu. I please invite you to come and join us on the podium. Thank you.
Hello, bonjour, kwekwe. It's so nice to be here with you all on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin peoples. National Chief Archibald, dear friend from long ago. We laugh every time we see each other because our paths have crossed like this for many years. The AFN regional chiefs and executive, hello everyone. It's nice to see people. All of the leaders, chiefs and activists that are in the room, thank you very much for the invitation. And a special hello to all of the aunties out there like Auntie Irene, who give all of our communities the love and the courage to continue to do what we do. C'est un honor d'être ici sur la terre.
It's an honor to be here on the traditional and unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. I'm from Thunder Bay on the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation signatories of the Robinson Superior Treaty. I'm pleased to be here with you to have the opportunity to speak and listen.
It's been incredibly wonderful to gather in person again, to listen, to act, to push together on the huge mountain of work ahead. It's also a time to share our grief and our rage at the murders of yet another 4 Indigenous women in Winnipeg. My heart's with their families, their friends, and the communities that are facing such a horrific loss. It shows us that the toxic blend of patriarchy, colonialism, and racism that's still so alive in this country continues to be Indigenous women and girls that bear the brunt of a society that undermines the value of the lives of those Indigenous women and girls. We've done work together on changing systems across all jurisdictions, but I can tell you, as a woman, a mother, a daughter, myself, I can say that it's not been fast enough. All forms of racism are forms of violence, and interpersonal racist and violent acts can't be separated from systemic and institutionalized racism and discrimination. When institutions are racist and discriminatory, it's an implicit endorsement of interpersonal racism. And that's why I take this role so seriously, and why I will always fight for equity and transformation of laws that entrench the tools of self-determination. Canada should not have to be forced to do the right thing through legal action, although that has been an effective, if not lengthy, path. I think Canada will be stronger and more prosperous and better prepared for the challenges of the future for all of our peoples if we focus together on honoring treaty, restoring and returning land, negotiating settlements, and pivoting our work together on stronger and healthier communities using the foundations of equity and true co-development of legislation. These are the tools of prosperity and health for Indigenous peoples, and indeed for all people. When people have a fair chance to succeed, the entire country prospers. The National Indigenous Economic Development Board, in their recently released strategy, quantifies the cost of inaction. Closing the productivity gap alone through better education and success for Indigenous peoples would lead to an increase of $27.7 billion per year to the GDP. That's about 1.5% a year. That's a huge number. So we have to do more faster. It's a loss of potential, a loss of opportunity for your peoples, your communities, your nations, and indeed the country as a whole. This year has been a very, very busy year. Many of you have been recovering from the burden of managing COVID. There has been legal action settled on water, for example. We continue to work hard together to lift the remaining 30 long-term water advisories. It is hard work on behalf of all of us, but now we have the money and the tools to get it done. On that note, I know that the AFN has been working diligently with Canada on creating new water legislation, and it's been a difficult path, but I know that we're going to find the right legislative tools together that will protect drinking water for First Nations people, indeed for all people. It's a legacy that I hope I get to be part of to leave for all of our children. On CHRT, I note that the AFN, along with other parties, have worked extremely hard to arrive at a final settlement agreement. I just ran into Dr. Blackstock outside. I thanked her for her decades of hard work, of advocacy for children and families to get fairness, compassion, healthy care, care that's self-determined. She told me when I first talked to her a year ago that I was her 16th Minister of Indigenous Services. I hope that I'm her last. I hope that we get this deal completed, and I want to thank everyone for staying with it. And I want to recommit to you today that the Government of Canada will stay with you to get kids and their families the compensation they're owed, but also, and I think increasingly, I think most importantly, to rebuild a system of care and of funding that will ensure that every First Nation child has a safe and healthy childhood. But we're not going to wait for the long-term reform to take action. Indeed, in April 2022, the Government of Canada increased prevention funding, extended the age of majority up to 26. We need to act quickly with the tools that we currently have while we get that long-term reform correct, because every child matters. That means every child today deserves to have the best possible beginning. I have traveled a lot over the last year, and I'm so grateful to the many communities that have welcomed me. It's been important to visit, to hear about your stories and your challenges and your advocacy. And the key areas that come up are housing, infrastructure gaps, climate change and emergency management, health care challenges. On housing and infrastructure, the Government of Canada made a commitment to close the gap by 2030. And I think it's a critical component to the success of your communities. The AFN housing study, for example, indicates that the value of the gap is $60 billion. The 2030 gap analysis so far shows well over $150 billion. These are staggering amounts, but I'm so grateful to all of you for helping me count that gap, because what we can't see, we can't do what we can't see, and now we know what the value of that gap is. This is an ambitious, complex goal, and it's going to take partners from across the country. But we can't continue with status quo. It's not healthy. There's no chance for recovery and learning and healing without a healthy home or community infrastructure that provides the best chance of success. On the side of the communities, you're spending infrastructure money as fast as it's coming in, and that's good. The total infrastructure investments and commitments of more than $17 billion since 2015, $4 billion on First Nations housing, more than 68% of that funding is allocated, and you need to keep doing that with us, and I know you can. We need to get that money out the door as fast as we get it in the budgets so we can demonstrate that we can spend every dollar. And we need to remove all those barriers to increase funding for faster movement. And by you taking that job in your communities seriously and getting that money spent, you help me with my argument in that we can spend as quickly as we can receive. And it's not just about spending, it's about good infrastructure. It's about building in a way that's sustainable and that will last generations. And I know that you have many ideas on how we transform infrastructure, and I'm listening. I'll continue to advocate for your community's needs and the resources and the flexibility to build the communities that your members envision. Many good things also happened last year. In March, Wabstamong Independent Nations signed a tripartite coordination agreement with Canada and with Ontario on child and family services that was the first in Ontario, the second in Canada. Cet été, à Kanawake, nous avons signé une nouvelle entente régionale sur l'éducation.
Had in Kanawake the new regional agreement with 22 First Nations from Quebec, and this agreement was directed by the Indigenous, and culture and languages are at the very heart of that work.
Nations Water Authority Service Transfer Agreement is supporting up to 17 communities to continue to access and to build forward a future with clean water. It's the first Indigenous water utility in Canada. Water operators, resources, and capacity will be strengthened, and it's a potential model for regional support of clean water. Nation land in Vancouver, I had the honor of witnessing this ceremony. This is an Indigenous-owned project with up to 6,000 units of housing that will be built in downtown Vancouver, Indigenous-led, Indigenous-owned, an example of a solution to a long-standing problem and led by Indigenous people who have lived there since time immemorial. Health systems navigators and ombuds roles in Saskatchewan, new power for Indigenous people to transform healthcare, to advocate for equity in healthcare services. We're just getting started. We have so much more to do. And urban renewal and focus on Indigenous peoples in urban settings. The renewal of Indigenous friendship centers. I know allies to many of you who do the work of supporting people in urban centers that are from your communities. Women's shelters in urban settings to make sure that when women do find themselves in the heart of Vancouver, there's places like Velma's house to help them pick up the pieces and stay safer. Ce ne sont que quelques exemples, car il y a tellement d'autres choses.
There's so many good things that are happening, and many efforts of the efforts of the whole of government, not just services, Indigenous Services Canada.
Unlocking self-determination. This is really, I think, the future for Indigenous communities. Great work is going on by NACA and Indigenous financial institutions. I was so pleased to be at the launch of the National Indigenous Economic Development Strategy in June. I can tell you there is a lot of work to do, but it is truly the potential for the future and for today. New Indigenous trade agreements are in place with IPETCA. This gives Indigenous-owned businesses new growth opportunities. There's new partnerships springing up, like Beatagong and Marathon in my own riding of Thunder Bay Superior North, two communities that typically had had a lot of contentious relationships who have come together over the last 7 years and have secured the approval of Generation Mine. It's a sign of the future. And even yesterday, the $800+ million announced by Prime Minister Trudeau and Environment Canada to support Indigenous-led conservation efforts in 3 key regions. You have always known this land, and your knowledge is invaluable in protecting it for the future generations. So I'll end with this. Reconciliation is a process, but I don't think it can be defined by the colonizer. It's rather the people who are rebuilding the culture and community, and sometimes it's hard to see progress when disparities continue. I think we're on the right path, but we all have to continue to push ourselves in our positions to ask, are we doing our best? Are we fighting our hardest? Are there new tools? Can we think of different ways of doing things so we can solve these problems for once and for all? I do that every day, and I am so honored to do it with you. I'm grateful for the mentorship that you've shown me. Je vous remercie pour tout votre travail et votre plaidoyer.
Thank you for all of your work and your help, and I'm looking forward to the next year of working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No time for questions.
Okay, thank you.
I will explain.
Okay.
This is yours. Thank you very, very much. L'honorable ministre Patty Haidu, ministre des Services Autochtones Canada.
Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, the Honourable Minister Patty Hajdu.
30, and we still have one minister, Minister Marc Miller, and I see him just over there. And then we'll have the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, at 4. So thank you, and I will now turn the floor over. And as you could see, we gave a gift. National Chief gave a gift also to Minister Haidu, and I will now turn the floor over to my colleague, Adam. Thank you.
Miigwech, thank you very much. Minister Haidu is on the side here. Again, one more minister. We don't want to cut into the time that you have with the Prime Minister at 4 o'clock. So at this point, I'd like to ask Minister Marc Miller to make his way up to the podium. Minister Miller, if you could come up. Of course, Minister Miller is Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations. So with that, I will ask Minister Miller to make the presentation. We are hoping that there will be time for 1 or 2 questions, and then the Prime Minister at 4 o'clock. So we're hoping there will be 1 or 2 questions. So we'll give you a nudge. So with that, Minister Miller.
Thank you for the introduction, Kwekwe. Hello, bonjour. Agwai ganchi wageni gunaratsaruni chiskatne ido esumwa. Marc Miller yochats dane ohanta igire gagora onkwe homwe chite onkwe nawagno ne gagorasra ne goratne. Nyangoa chi waskwa hungaronga agezeke. Very pleased to be with you here today. Thank you for the opening this morning and getting these assemblies up. That was a reminder. I got to keep practicing. It really is a pleasure to be joining you here today on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I saw a number of you. I've seen a number of you throughout the summer, but a great number of you in Vancouver. It's just really nice to see you all again here in this room and speak to you, particularly in person. First, I do want to acknowledge the brutal murders of Indigenous women lost in Winnipeg, which are horrific and devastating. Each of the lives lost were cherished and loved members of their families and communities. Their murders represent a fear that Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI persons live with on a daily basis and continue to live with on this ongoing tragedy. Our hearts go out to the families and the communities for these horrific losses. Nobody should have to go through this pain and through the re-traumatizing process to uncover the truth and get to justice. Nobody should have to search for their mother in the trash, and no human should be treated like trash. I had a brief moment to speak to some of the girls of one of the victims, and their bravery is incomparable. But the meeting left me with more questions than I had going in, and they definitely deserve the answers that they're looking for. I do want to take the time to acknowledge the work that AFN is doing, and particularly the Women's Council, to develop the Breathing Life into calls to action, into the Calls for Justice report, which is, as you know, part of the broader 2021 National Action Plan on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit Plus Peoples. Nous continuerons d'être des alliés en abordant cette crise nationale et en travaillant avec vous et vos communautés pour trouver des solutions.
To support healing and justice at this end, we will continue to work to put in place the National Action Plan, and we will continue to build the National Inquiry Commission. The relations, so Indigenous Crown relations continue to build that relationship. It's essential to invest in cultural spaces to ensure to counter the core reasons for violence.
We need to remain funded in communities. The Cultural Spaces and Indigenous Communities program generated an overwhelming response over the last year, with more than 340 applications received for over $950 million of cumulated funded requests. With an envelope of just a little over $100 million over 2 years, this program is currently significantly oversubscribed. The 65 projects that have been approved and announced over the last year are important and will help keep people safe. Sadly, I won't stand in here in front of you today and pretend that these, had they been in place, would have saved those 4 women. But I do know that the work you're doing in implementing and building those structures will have a safe space for people for years to come. The level of response and the incredible breadth of vision shown in each proposal has given our department in particular a better idea of the scale of cultural spaces needed, and will continue focusing on our efforts in bridging Indigenous infrastructure gaps as per the Government of Canada's commitment. To ensure we continue advancing progress, in January I'm convening a meeting between Indigenous partners and the federal, provincial and territorial governments on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls and Two-Spirit Plus people. We welcome the AFN's participation in this meeting, and I know our teams are already in close communication on this. It's an opportunity to form stronger relationship between all levels of government, highlight the great work that partners, and discuss the way forward to achieve concrete results, which is something we all want to see. We know that the word jurisdiction is a word that is poisonous in this context, and it contributes to the killing of women and girls. On June 22nd, we introduced Bill C-29, and I'm pleased to report that it's received unanimous support and was adopted at third reading in the House of Commons. It will now go to Senate review, and when this bill receives royal assent, it will enable the creation of a National Council for Reconciliation, increasing accountability and implementing the calls to action 53 through 56. As intended, the Council will be an Indigenous-led, independent and permanent body to monitor, evaluate and report on our country's reconciliation progress, no matter what the government. In all this work, we must keep the voices of survivors front and center in our work. We can't forget about the terrible history of residential schools and its impact on families and communities. La visite du pape au Canada cet été.
The visit of the Pope to Canada this summer and the apology he offered to recognize this different painful history and the institutions that perpetuated it. In Nunavut, I was able to sit beside people who lived through this, and we were able to hear and share some of the most difficult truths. And we are working to support the healing of many peoples across Canada. I offered sacred tobacco on the fire, and I spoke with families of survivors at the St. Albert Residential School. It reminded me that the truth must be at the center of reconciliation. And clearly there's a lot to do to heal.
$60 million for the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation to build a new permanent home so that survivors, their families, and people across Canada and around the world can come to learn the truth about residential schools. This is in addition to the more than $28 million in new funding for the NCTR to continue its vital work collecting, reviewing, and making accessible residential schools and supporting community-led efforts to locate and identify unmarked burials and your loved ones. These resources will also support the National Residential School Death Register and online National Cemetery Register and the National Advisory Committee on Missing Children and Unmarked Burials, making progress in implementing calls to action 72 through 76. We'll also continue to make supports available directly to communities. To date, we've reached 93 funding arrangements supporting local research and knowledge gathering, commemoration, and memorialization and field investigation work to help communities bring their missing children home. En novembre, je me suis joint au chef régional.
I joined Regional Chief Paul Presper to discuss the specific so to accelerate the particular
on these together on the
to accelerate their particular claims.
Have been making improvements to the existing process in response to your concerns. We're also no longer using the Indian Act surrenders as part of specific claims resolution, and we'll work with First Nations on legislative reforms to do away with this colonialist concept. These changes are all driving progress on the timely resolution of claims. We're well on our way to settling 50 specific claims in 2022, totaling more than $2.2 billion, a record year in compensation for First Nations across the country. There's been lots of talk about economic reconciliation, a crucial topic. But economic reconciliation also means that Canada must pay its bills long past due. And should a community request it, we are also offering formal apologies for harms done. Ispiknitso kaagimik takwapepisim ekimihikia mitateya tamowin kiki sit Toskagewin, Kichi Okimanak, Ochi Isi Okimagan, Francis Dieter, Ikwa Mamawaya Winik, Tipi Takosiwak, Ochi Pipikisis, Kiki, Kakwatakitawan, Tawin, Kakwatakeimowin, Mina Ioka Kawanitachik, Otas Kiwinawa, Onehia Watsiwin, Mina Opikisquiwina, Kachi Mositachi Kais Otsi, Canada, Otas Toskiwin, Pichi Filed Hills, Aski, Kakwahia, Kihiwin. In Cree, hopefully Plains Cree, I just mentioned that on August 3rd, I offered a formal apology on behalf of our government to Chief Francis Dieter and the community members of Pepihis Cree Nation for the harm, trauma, and significant loss in land, culture, and language experienced due to Canada's role in the File Hills colony scheme, a racist scheme imposed on that community. To the best of my ability, out of respect, and what the community wants it, I will do my best to offer it in their language. Concerning the additions to reserve policy redesign, discussions have been held at different paces and along different timelines. But I'm committed to supporting First Nations-led engagement in all the regions. There is collaboration with AFN, but we know this work has to accelerate, and this work that I'm doing with Minister Haidu. The process is largely broken, glacial in its pace, and a terrible way to get land back. Our work to co-develop these two processes show how much progress we can make when we sit at the same table and find solutions together. For example, the Department is working with First Nations to modernize fiscal arrangements to advance economic reconciliation. It involves modernizing the First Nations Fiscal Management Act and working closely with First Nations fiscal institutions. It also includes modernizing federal tax policy and changing our approach to phasing out of Section 87 of the Indian Act for modern treaties and self-governance instruments. Thanks to your advocacy and your engagement, Finance Canada recently revised this policy so that First Nations community members will not have to trade their Section 87 tax exemption and rights to reach modern treaty and other reconciliation arrangements. Ces changements éliminent les obstacles pour les communautés qui choisissent de...
Those changes remove obstacles for those who choose by detaching from the Indian Act. We support all nations that want to auto-government. The bill S10 got royal assent, and it offers governance to Anishinaabe, and it modernizes legislation according to the desires of the First Nation. And for those nations wishing to leave behind the Indian Act. I signed this with the Nipissing First Nation.
Thank you for the invitation to speak here, and look forward to working together over the next few days and weeks and hopefully years. Miigwech, hai hai, ekuse, kinenas komitin. Thank you. Merci.
I'll open up for questions. Miigwech, thank you, Minister Miller. So, Chiefs, we have 7 minutes until the Prime Minister approaches and addresses the Assembly. I do see a number of Chiefs on at the microphone, so I'm going to take 2 at a time and then get the Minister to respond. I will follow the same order, incorporating the Zoom. So microphone 1 and then microphone 2, and then the Minister will respond. So microphone 1, go ahead.
Byron Lewis, Chief of the Okanagan Band, and this is to Minister Miller, and it concerns a recent comment that was made on the Digital Court decision. And, you know, one of the statements that I heard that was made was that there was recognition of the Sinixt in Washington State. The problem with that with us is that any type of transboundary tribe, the other descendants are actually located in British Columbia. And, you know, to give you a quick rundown on there, that ties right in with the Liberal Party. The former minister that was one of the first cabinet ministers in the Liberal government under Pierre Elliott Trudeau was Len Marchand. Len Marchand was also a member of the Okanagan Indian Band, but more so, he was a direct descendant of one of the chiefs of the Sinixt, who was Chief Arapaho. His son today sits on the BC Supreme Court of the same descent. I am also of Sinixt descent, and so is half of our band, that of the Okanagan Band, that has over 2,000 members. The former chief of West Bank is the same person of same descent, and also is the chief of the Sioux Band, and a former chief of Upper Nicola, Upper Smelkameen Band, who is a direct descendant of Chief Stu Hun, who was a chief of Trout Lake and Arrow Lakes, and our our home villages were around Revelstoke in that area. So when we're talking about recognition, that recognition goes both ways. And I would ask that in the future that any type of reference to the Digital court decision, that it recognizes that there are people of Sinixt descent, and I have one standing right beside me that is of Sinixt descent. And that is something that we really need to recognize, because you can't pick and choose on that. You must recognize both parties. And with that, you know, we'd like to, you know, have that being put onto record. And, you know, we can prove that. Every ethnographic overview assessment that was done in the Arrow Lakes by BC Hydro, the federal government, under the Columbia Treaty, you know, identified that area as being Sinixt and Sinixt descent. Well, you know, that information is our information. We are of Sinixt descent. So we'd be asking you in the future, when any type of reference is made, that we have that same recognition. And lastly, I think one of the things, since it's on this whole issue of UDRIP and others, I would actually say that one of the issues on there is that Section 83(1) does not allow for the application of the UN DRIP under 3 to 5. What we need in the future is that changes to that section, or recognition of that section, that allows us to actually have our bylaws recognized as federal laws, which means it compels the RCMP to enforce all bylaws made under Section 81. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Microphone number 1. I'll go to microphone number 2, up to 3 minutes. Go ahead, microphone 2.
Thank you, Minister Miller and Mr. Haidu that spoke here. Anyway, I'm Terrence Nelson. I'm from Roseau River Reserve. I'm a proxy. 16 years ago, in December 2006, I stood here and I said we were going to have a national day of action. We were going to block the railway line, because the issue was that the lands weren't being converted, the treaties weren't being upheld. So we didn't have too much of a problem, because the Conservatives were pretty well clashing with us. And but the thing is that Prentice called me and said, what can we do? And I said, well, just live up to the TLEs, the Treaty Land Entitlements. We signed in 1996. And he said, okay, do you have any lands? And yeah, I have 74 acres on the northwest side of Winnipeg. Is it in Winnipeg? He said, no. I told him no. And he says, oh yeah, we can do that. It took him 6 weeks from start to finish to convert that land. And he also converted 550,000 acres in the province of Manitoba. And that was Prentice. He committed to 150,000 acres per year for 4 years. And since then, since 2007, when he converted that land on June 13, 2007, we have zero lands converted under the Liberal government. We have 24,167 acres that we can convert. So I'd like to ask you to pick up the phone to Dana Smith in Manitoba region and tell them to get the hell moving on some of these TLEs. And I'd also like you to, and I'd like to ask you, how much is the Liberals converted? Now, that's a question that I want to answer, is that, you talk the good talk, but how much lands have you converted? How much have you done? So, Minister Miller, no disrespect, and we'd just like you to get going. Pick up that phone and get our lands converted.
Thank you very much. Microphone number 2. So we are going for a response. Minister Miller, encore with the microphones. He's at the table on the right-hand side. If you can activate the microphone, please. Try it there and see what happens.
There you go. Hi. Respond to these two questions. Again, I met with the Sinaiks from Colville tribes about 2 weeks ago, and it's an irony that shouldn't be lost on anyone that this decision is 16 months ago and that no one had reached out to them since then. Yet we are doing analysis on the impact of this decision without having reached out to the Colville tribes that have been recognized as Aboriginal peoples of Canada under the Constitution and a Supreme Court decision. So this was a meeting to show respect for these people that had a long-fought battle and to actually speak to them. The Des Hotels, as it's not lost on any of you, has a tremendous potential to really impact how we govern ourselves as a country and who we recognize. At the same time, we can't discard the realities of what that has done to people over time. So the Sinaiks being part of other communities, and I appreciate that intervention because it is something that we'll have to remind ourselves of constantly. This border was imposed on your peoples, and you live the effects in terms of border communities in particular on a daily basis. So there is a lot to be said about that decision, but judges deal with a certain set of facts, and the government is tasked with implementing them on another set of facts and conditions and suppositions. So it is something that we are looking at, but I think it's an important reminder to us that we can't forget and can't exclude people from this conversation, particularly when Canada has been complicit on imposing those conditions that have forced the Sinaiks to associate in different other ways and with other communities. So I have a lot of respect for that comment that was made, and I'm glad to engage as well. And we can't be picking winners and losers as a country. We've done it too long, or picking favorites. On the comment by Terrence Nelson, I absolutely agree. I asked my team to get back to the table on the treaty land entitlement. This is something that should have been done 25 years ago, or in the mid-90s we said it would be done in 25 years, and it's still not done. We're only halfway there. So I've asked my teams to get back to the table, to get out of the courtroom and work with the treaty land entitlement communities to come to some process where we can actually honor and respect treaty. So I'm glad to pick up the phone and speak to whoever I need to get this going. I can't pretend. I'm not going to pretend that it's going to happen overnight, but I have asked my teams to get back out of the court and back at the negotiation table. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Miller. We can afford to take one more, and we can only take one more if it can be brief. Microphone number 1, please. Go ahead.
Scanot Sego, good afternoon. My name is Marc Hill, and I'm the current elected Chief of Six Nations, the Grand River Territory. And I come here today with a good mind and with a message to you, Minister Miller, and to the Government of Canada. As many of you are aware, Six Nations has been in a battle to deal with our lands for decades. And we are finally at a point in time where we've secured a trial date that's going to expect it to begin next year. As many of you are also aware, we also have our Haudenosaunee, our hereditary council, which we've never really seen eye to eye, but have always tried to build relationships. And Minister, I know I've already written to your office as I had found out that you were in our territory without proper notice or protocol. Meeting with the Hereditary Council. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. However, that undermines our efforts as a community to try to unite our community in a way amidst the biggest court case of our people's history. And I have to come here with that good mind, and again with no disrespect to state, that type of behavior and the same tactics of the divide and conquer that the government continues to use on our people does not push us forward. It in fact stalls us. And I wanted to make this, and there's no question, it's more of a comment on behalf of Six Nations, that we have internal affairs that we need to figure out ourselves as our people of Six Nations. We don't need assistance from the Government of Canada to come in and to tell us otherwise, or to meet with other entities. We need to do that on our own time and with our own people in one room. And we don't need the government's help to do that. So I come here with that message to respectfully ask that you continue to look at the protocols and procedures when coming to territories, because it would have been nice to get notice from your office that you were in my territory, meeting with other entities not a last-minute text message claiming it as notification. I think there's procedures that we're all well aware of, and again, I have the utmost respect for our hereditary chiefs and clan mothers, and will continue to do the work that we have to do amongst our people at Six Nations. We're sick and tired of the divide and conquer, and I'm here to state that message loud and clear. Nyawe.
Miigwech, thank you, Chief Hill. Miigwech. Minister Miller, any final comments before we have the Prime Minister make his way up?
Is this still, hello? Chief Hill, first, this is not meant as any form of disrespect to you, and I know the fierce advocacy that you bring to the table as part of your people. The context in which I met with the Haudenosaunee chiefs and clan mothers was one where I was asked to meet without the presence of Band Council, and I agreed. It followed up on a number of communications that you had been copied with that had happened over time in connection to the recent events in Caledonia. I should have given you better notice, and for that I do apologize. The reality is, about 100 years ago, the RCMP was sent in to disband the Haudenosaunee traditional leadership, and that was wrong. This is something that, as you know, has repercussions today in the community, and the feeling that Canada, quote-unquote, only sides with Band Council. I have a duty to respect all voices in communities, and my duty is to Indigenous peoples, and it's one that I take very seriously. The last thing that I want to do is cause any turmoil in the community. What I said as part of those meetings will remain confidential, but it was not a message of exclusion. Some of my words may not have been welcomed, but I said them truly and openly, and I do mean them, and these are communications that will continue. Again, there is absolutely no intent to undermine. Canada has done enough of that, but I do undertake to give you proper notice going forward.
Thank you very much, Minister Marc Miller. And with that, we'd like to say, Miigwech, thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask you to come over to my left side, and we have a special gift presentation with National Chief Archibald. Would like to present a gift to say thank you for joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague to introduce the next presenter.
Thank you, Adam. And Miigwech, Minister Miller. Alors, nous sommes maintenant.
So we've gotten to the part of the day where we will welcome the Prime Minister, the Honorable Justin Trudeau, who will join us in a few moments. The way this will be done, there will be a presentation by Mr. Prime Minister and then a question and answer period. We will ask a few questions as a block and go back to the Prime Minister, and it'll be around 20 minutes.
In the coming seconds, announce the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Right Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He'll have a presentation, and then we'll have a question and answers period. I'll manage it the same way we dealt with other questions for ministers, like we'll have three chiefs, and then we'll turn the floor back over to the Prime Minister. So on that, I will now turn the floor over to National Chief to formally introduce the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So as you can see, I'm now looking to have a sign. Okay, I can see. Okay, thank you so much. So I now turn the floor over to National Chief for a formal introduction to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as he's coming to as he enters the Assembly room. Thank you very much, National Chief. To you.
Thank you very much, Weena. Minister Miller is still on this side of the room for those chiefs that I saw Chief Jocko standing there. If you wanted to maybe head over there to ask your question, or if you had another kind of question. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, chiefs, delegates, guests, I'm very pleased to introduce our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, to the meeting to come and make some remarks to you and take some questions. I wanted you to know that the regional chiefs and I recently met with the Prime Minister this in the month of November. It was our first meeting with the Prime Minister since 2019. We talked about many things and each regional chief was given a limited amount of time, 2 minutes, to speak to the Prime Minister at that time. But we did commit that we are going to have a longer meeting with the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, and we're really looking forward to that. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our Prime Minister, Minister Justin Trudeau.
Good afternoon. Je suis très heureux de me joindre.
I'm very happy to join you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation that we recognize as the past, present, and future custodians of this land.
All in person. I want to thank the elders, National Chief Archibald, regional chiefs, and all the chiefs in Assembly for having me and members of our government here at your meeting. I appreciated our conversations last week as well, when I got the chance to sit down with a number of you to hear about the priorities for your regions. There really is no replacement for being together, for the connections we share when we're person to person. J'espère que les réunions.
I hope the meetings and the discussions you've had over the last few days were productive. I know that many other ministers have spoken about the work that our government is doing for First Nations of Turtle Island. We are here today to answer people's needs. We're here to create the best future possible for First Nations in Canada for these 7 coming generations.
And tackling big challenges. As you know, work at this size and scale takes time, especially if we're going to get it right. The pervasive and systemic issues generated by our colonial past cannot be overturned overnight. The full benefits will be felt over years to come, but only if we don't let up on our work. We need to continue to push together through this with even more urgency. That's why, since day one, it has been a fundamental priority of our government to work with you, to be there and continue to make investments that address historical wrongs and create opportunities and support self-determination. This is putting reconciliation in action. And for our government to do this properly, we need your continued support, wisdom, and direction. For example, there's work ahead to make sure First Nations communities are as safe and healthy as can be. I had the honor of visiting James Smith Cree Nation last week to sit down with the grieving families and affected community members. There, we talked about the need for better, culturally grounded mental health and addiction support for those who need it when they need it. And importantly, we talked about keeping Indigenous communities safe and moving past colonial structures towards community-based safety and wellness projects. I'm holding those conversations close as we advance this crucial work together. We also know your communities need further housing investments. Everyone in Canada deserves a safe and healthy place to raise and support their family. So, in our spring budget, we announced major investments to support housing on reserve. This will help build and renovate thousands of homes. We're working with Indigenous partners on launching an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy, and we're continuing our work with First Nations to co-develop and bring forward new water legislation that serves your needs. A safe, clean, and healthy environment is important to everyone in Canada. Many of your communities have shared teachings with me about your cultural and spiritual connections with nature. Vous faisiez de la pêche dans les océans.
You were fishing in the oceans well before the arrival of Europeans. You learned to hunt thanks to your traditional knowledge that your elders were transmitting for generations. And you know since time immemorial the foods and the medicines that the earth gives to us. Your respect for the land and your ways of caring for it are essential to our collective efforts to protect the environments and fight climate change and to reverse the loss of biodiversity.
I announced that our government is investing $800 million for 4 major Indigenous-led conservation areas that will conserve almost 1 million square kilometers of nature. This not only protects important plants, animals, and marine life, but also makes sure that we're preserving nature that absorbs and stores carbon. We cannot protect or manage these conserved areas without the full participation of First Nations. This investment is a major step forward in protecting nature across the country and will drive progress towards Canada's ambitious goals of conserving 25% of land and waters by 2025 and 30% of each by 2030. We're supporting the vision and stewardship of the Indigenous communities in this work as we move forward to build a better future and create jobs. We're also working together on some of the tougher, more difficult areas of reconciliation, areas where we know the healing journey for all of us is still long. The news out of Winnipeg last week has been heartbreaking. 4 Indigenous women missing and likely murdered. These chilling and recurring acts of violence against Indigenous women cannot continue. Our government remains committed to transformational change. We're continuing to work with partners to implement the federal pathway, which is our contribution to the National Action Plan to address the ongoing tragedy of MMIWG. On est conscient du travail difficile qu'il reste à faire.
We're conscious of the difficult work that remains to be done while you continue shining light on the difficult and painful truths of what happened to your children in residential schools. This spring, we named a special reporter, Kimberly Murray, to master the legal complexities and jurisdictional complexities of this work. And we will continue ensuring that you have the necessary resources to find the graves of your children and commemorate them.
To acknowledge your bravery in hosting the papal apology visit this summer as part of Call to Action 58. Like many of you, I attended the event in Masquachish. I saw firsthand how important the moment was for many, including non-Indigenous Canadians, for the recognition and acceptance of the painful truth of what happened to your children, families, and communities as a direct result of residential schools and ongoing colonial policies. It bears recognizing that the Pope's apology would never have happened without the courage, grace, and advocacy of survivors. Our government remains committed to fully implementing all the TRC recommendations that are federal responsibilities. We're working to right past wrongs and injustices, including wrongful surrenders of land In June, I went to the Siksika Nation, where after 6 decades of advocacy and fighting, our government finally announced a co-developed settlement agreement that will provide significant financial compensation. The settlement will go towards the nation's vision of a strong community, economic development, job creation, and more. On va de l'avant avec la...
We're moving forward with implementation of the law on UNDRIP. This law was adopted in June of last year. We will continue working with you to ensure that UNDRIP facilitates reconciliation, healing, and cooperation between the federal government and Indigenous people and all Indigenous people everywhere in Canada. We are also increasing our investments, and we're collaborating with partners at every level. We want to know your opinions on how we can respond to your needs, to the needs of First Peoples. Whatever the challenges we need to overcome, it's important to overcome them together.
How important it is that we continue to find effective and meaningful ways of working together. You've heard me say it before. No relationship is more important to our government than the relationship with Indigenous peoples. And we need to make sure we're using the right tools to manage and support this relationship. 6 years ago, our government announced the creation of the Permanent Bilateral Mechanism. This doesn't in any way replace the nation-to-nation treaty relationships, but it does offer a forum in which we can discuss shared priorities, develop policies, and monitor our progress. In the past, we've used it for meaningful progress, including working with First Nations on co-developing the Indigenous Languages Act, which received royal assent in 2019. This is historic legislation that will preserve and strengthen Indigenous languages for generations to come. Just 2 weeks ago, in fact, the MP for the Northwest Territories, Michael MacLeod, announced a new investment to support Indigenous languages in the North. This work was possible in part because of the Permanent Bilateral Mechanism. So let's revitalize this tool. Let's use it to make sure we're identifying national, regional, and grassroots priorities, and to make sure we're delivering on all levels. Élaborons ensemble un cadre de travail conjoint.
Let us create together a joint framework which will allow us to respond to all the fields I've mentioned and more, including financial and economic development. The Permanent Bilateral Mechanism can help us do this work. We can also use this mechanism to measure the impact of our investments on the ground and to ensure that we're doing things right. Every community has different needs, and we want to know them.
Can be part and should be part of thinking about how we can better use this permanent bilateral mechanism. And please continue to engage with cabinet ministers as a part of this work. We can all be your partners in tackling issues specific to your regions. Now, you've heard me use the words work and together a lot over these past few minutes, because that's what this is, a working relationship, because there is lots of work to do. We want to get it done as efficiently as possible because we know how pressing the needs are in your communities. So let's not let anything get in our way. When we face setbacks, we'll find new solutions. First Nations people today and the next generations are depending on us to get and to make this right. Let's keep building a solid foundation built on respect in our working relationship. Of course, our government recognizes that this takes time, effort, and resources, and we'll be there with you every step of the way. But we cannot do it alone. This is hard work, but it's good work. Work that reinforces the strength and resilience of First Nations communities, work that helps us heal, work that builds a better future, work done in partnership that moves us all forward on the path of reconciliation. Miigwech, Nanaskamutanao, Masicho, Gela Kasla. Merci. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Miigwech, Mr. Prime Minister. As I said earlier, there will be a question period. We will have 3 speakers at once. 1, 2, 3.
Speakers at a time, so we'll start with the microphone number 1, then microphone number 2, and then the third person behind you. So microphone number 1, you have up to 3 minutes, and I will please ask you kindly to clearly state your name and First Nations. Thank you. Microphone number 1, please.
Thank you so much. Greetings from the traditional Treaty 6 territory. I'm the proxy chief on behalf of the Onion Lake Cree Nation. We'd like to send also our greetings and our thanks to this traditional territory of the Algonquins and the Anishinaabe, and thank you for having us here. I heard this morning, Honorable Justin Trudeau, you talk about work, togetherness, reconciliation. I find it interesting on a morning where we wake up to Bill 1, coming out of Alberta. When last night I listened to it for 5.5 hours straight, and the experts said it's unconstitutional. It's an attack on our treaty and our inherent rights. It's something that will tear at the fabric of what you call the state of Canada and what we call Turtle Island. It's hurtful to hear that our treaty partners, as it were, are not standing behind us and giving those strong messages to say, there's a problem here. You're talking about working, you're talking about togetherness. But signals like like Bill 1 and Bill 88 coming out of Saskatchewan send the wrong signals. They tell us that this pathway that we're going down is not a pathway that it's together. It then again leaves us out as treaty nations, sovereign treaty nations, trying to shut off our voices, trying to impact our treaties, trying to terminate our rights. So as our treaty partner, we read your messages this morning in the news. It was very, very disappointing. So how are we going to be able to work together? We call on, as Onion Lake Cree Nation, from my territory, all treaty nations and allies to put in writing a letter from rights holders to denounce, retract, and reject these bills, Bill 1 and Bill 88, that tear at the fabric of our lands. You said, and I've heard the ministers say, we're here to work together. Our treaties were meant that we should flourish and that we should be able to come together. But instead, that puts us even lower on the bottom of the scale. So how is this a good signal, Honorable Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister? How is this a good signal? That's my question to you. Onion Lake calls on all nations and allies to write letters from rights holders and do that work that we've shared by email.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Time is up. Thank you very much. Microphone number 2, please. 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister Trudeau. My name is Wendy Jocko, Chief for the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation. I would like to welcome. My name is Wendy Jocko, Chief for the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation. I would like to welcome you, your ministers, and the rest of your entourage to Algonquin territory, which has been blessed by the Creator with many gifts. As you may be aware, Pikwakanagan, along with other Algonquins in Ontario, are in the final stages of treaty negotiations. This will be the first modern-day treaty in the province of Ontario. We have been petitioning the Crown since 1772 for lands back. My great-grandfather was Chief Pennesee. He actually signed 19 of those petitions in his lifetime. In 1991, the last petition was submitted and was accepted by the Crown. And previous chiefs have dedicated their lives, in particular, Chief Kirby White Duck, Chief Lisa Maness, Chief Robert White Duck, Chief Greg Saracen, and Chief Clifford Maness. So we are where we are at today. So this modern-day treaty encompasses 9 million acres, ranging from North Bay to Hawkesbury, including in its entirety the city of Ottawa. And Minister Miller actually did previously speak, and we did write a letter to yourself as well as Minister Miller, as you are aware. So we are very pleased to receive the letter on the 25th of November confirming the fact that we will not have to relinquish our reserve at Pikwakanagan to enter the modern-day treaty, in addition to giving up the tax exemption. So that, was a very positive letter, and we thank you very much for that. And since we really have no experience in treaty, I have been listening very intently over the course of the last couple of days to all the very experienced treaty chiefs sitting in the Assembly, in particular Chief Crowchild, who apparently has asked in the past many times if our treaty lands will be made into municipalities. And that is a great fear that she had. And of course, that is a great fear that members of Pikwakanagan have had and still have. So we need to be certain prior to signing any modern-day treaty that we will not be subject to changes for tax exemption, turning our lands into municipal ownership. So we need that confirmation, and if you could do that, we would much appreciate it. And
thank you very, very much, Chief. Thank you. So we'll go back to microphone number 1 for this last speaker of this block, and then I noticed that there is someone on the Zoom platform, but we'll go to the Zoom platform right after to the second block, since I already announced you, Chief, at microphone number 1. Please, you have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Wajik, Sylvia Kustajan, Matadawaban, Shinhasan. I'm from Madawabiskut First Nation Chief. Greetings to everybody that is here, men, women, the leaders, everybody, Prime Minister. I'm just going to get straight to it. There are many communities still suffering, such as Madawabiskut, and there's still many communities reeling with third world conditions. And you're calling for partnership, reconciliation, justice. Well, there's a lot of communities such as Madawabiskut that need to be heard. And there's communities like us shouldn't be suffering to meet the basic needs for our people. It's a struggle, and dealing with the bureaucracy and the systems and obstacles just to be heard is frustrating. It's frustrating for me. It's frustrating for other communities that are isolated. And I don't think it's fair, because we're supposed to live in Canada, one of the wealthiest in the country, and yet I can't even offer anything to our peoples because we're just very limited. I'm going through the bureaucratic process, but it's frustrating because it doesn't meet our needs, and it's not fast enough. When we say every child matters, within my community there's a lot of children and they all matter. Niskanjaga, for water, the basic life. Why do we have to come to these forums just to meet the basic needs for our people? I know we're at different levels. Some are privileged communities, but it's really, really frustrating when you're working from a remote community and just try to meet your basic needs. And that is all I wanted to say, bring to your attention. I'm frustrated because I come to these farms and I beg the chiefs here, why are we leaving communities behind? Stand up, make noise. It shouldn't happen today. I don't want to come back to the forum and say this over again. Attawapiskat, people are familiar with Attawapiskat. And it's time.
15 seconds.
Solve everything. It's frustrating. Mingash. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. So, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Prime Minister Trudeau, to you. Thank you.
See, I want to begin addressing the first question to thank the Chief for the proxy from Onion Lake for her words. We are extremely concerned about what the Sovereignty Act in Alberta and Bill 88 in Saskatchewan represent in terms of challenges to treaty rights that are fundamental in Canada and need to be respected. But just like the federal government shouldn't be, the relationship between a federal government and a provincial government is not one of a parent to a child. The Constitution brings together provinces and the federal government with distinct areas of jurisdiction and responsibility. And as we've seen, duly elected provincial governments can move forward on laws that we as a federal government disagree with. And the remedy for that is through the court system. Now, as we have said a number of times as a federal government, there are proposals and laws, including Bill 21 in Quebec, Bill 1 in Alberta right now, and others that we disagree with. And we will continue to have those conversations. And when it comes to fighting for treaty rights, when it comes to fighting for Section 35 rights, we will always be there. But we're in a situation right now where, to be direct and honest about it, Bill 1, the Sovereignty Act in Alberta, is being moved forward as very much a political tool to try and pick a fight with the federal government. And I'm not interested in fighting with the Alberta government. I know people in Alberta, whether it's First Nations people or non-Indigenous people, or anyone in Alberta, needs a government that is investing in them, building homes, creating jobs, fighting climate change, protecting nature, building a strong future, keeping communities safe. There are so many things we need to work on together, and our focus as a government is on being there for Albertans, for folks like people in Onion Lake in Saskatchewan, and people across the prairies and across the country. We're going to continue to be there, and we will stand in support as Albertans, as Saskatchewanians, as Quebecers challenge laws they see as unjust that come against their rights. It is, in a society of laws, a court process that is able to bring citizens to fight for their rights against government overreach. That's how our system works, and we will be there to continue to support. We will continue to work together with you. But we will not engage in the kind of political fight that the government of Alberta is looking for. We will stay focused on delivering for you, delivering for all Albertans, indeed delivering for all people across this country who need governments that work for them. Secondly, Chief Wendy, thank you for your welcome to this beautiful Algonquin territory. The modern treaty process is one that Minister Miller has been, and his predecessor, Carolyn Bennett, have been working very, very hard on in terms of streamlining, in terms of improving, in terms of working out so we can move you at your pace, in your ways, towards resolving long-standing issues. You talk about going back to the 1700s. It is time, it is overdue to work out what the incarnation of those treaties look like and what they should look like in modern times. I mentioned in my speech the agreement we came to with the Siksika Nation. It was $1.3 billion of compensation because of land that was taken away from them 100 years ago. It was something we worked out together through a process, and I hear your concerns and municipalities and tax bases, and those are all things that you are in the driver's seat on. You need to help define what it is that you want as a nation, what it is that you need as communities, and we need to figure out how to do that in a way that is consistent and fair, suited to you, but consistent across the country. And as every different community works at different pace and in different situations toward what is going to work for you, our responsibility is to be there to accompany, to be those partners, and yes, be there with resources, but it's not up to us. It would be a simple replication of the colonial structures for us to say, well, this is how the modern treaty will resolve itself for all of you. And I know for many communities, as you mentioned, it's a new process. There are places across the country where there are modern treaties, there are others that don't have that. And learning from what works for them, what could be adapted for you, is something that we are very much there to do. But true reconciliation can only work through those partnerships. It could probably be a lot faster if I had someone draw up what it should look like and just put it in. But it would be wrong. Because we can't replicate this colonial mindset if we're going to actually create the kind of partnership that we need. So it takes a little longer. And you're right to have all sorts of questions about it, and we'll try and give you the best possible answers on the pros and cons of this model versus that model. But we will and we need to continue to move forward towards the self-government, towards the support that each of you and so many of you want. And on that, Sylvia, I have to say that even as we see some parts and some communities in the country, as you point out, doing very well and have been able to build and transform things in a very positive way over the past few years, there are far too many others that are still struggling. I know there's a new school in Attawapiskat, but I also know that the youth center that I had made a commitment to got suspended during COVID and is now damaged and going to have to be started again. And the story of Attawapiskat is one of heartbreak, and the young people that are dealing with the situations there continue to be a real challenge. And you mentioned Miscandaga as well. Yes, we're getting closer to ending the boil water advisory there. We've put in a new water treatment plant, invested, but there's still work to be done. And we're going to continue doing that, and we're going to try and do it as quickly as possible, but it has to be done in partnership, and that's where we're pledged to continue to work with you to try and turn this around. And I know everyone in this room wants to see Attawapiskat and other regions and areas that are struggling so much do better, none more than me, and we will be there to help you on the path and with the priorities that you need, even though I absolutely agree it's taking too long. That we have to get it right, and that takes years, but we have to do it now, because now is when the kids need it. And finding the balance between that, how we can act with urgency but act concertedly together, is the tension that we all feel every single day as we try to move this country forward on the path of reconciliation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, the microphone. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. So if you're comfortable, I propose to go to do the last round, but I will kindly ask you to be very, very brief, and we'll go to first, yes, to the Zoom platform, and we'll have Chief Elizabeth Katakwapit from Fort Albany. We'll then go to microphone number 1, and then final speaker to microphone number 2, and it will close the question session. So the 3 last chiefs, please, if you can please unmute, and if you can please make sure, yes, your camera is on. Thank you very much to you, Chief Katakwapit, and you have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Wache Mr. Wache Prime Minister. Welcome back on Chief Elizabeth Katakwapit, Nation Person, Fort Albany First Nation Dushchin. I come from Fort Albany, where St. Anne's School was located, which was referred to as the most notorious residential school. In my homeland, there was much suffering of children that were sexually abused, physically abused. Just yesterday, a survivor told me of his experience being put in an electric chair twice, as well as being forced to eat his own vomit. Most of the most horrific abuses in Canada happened at St. Anne's Residential School. Survivors from northern communities have taken the position that reconciliation cannot be considered unless justice has been achieved for IRS survivors, including St. Anne's Residential School. Prime Minister, please stop fighting us, the First Nations people of Canada. Please release those residential school documents that are being withheld from us. We want to heal. We want justice now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. So I encourage you also to be, she's a good example. I encourage you, please, to be as brief as possible to get a proper response from Prime Minister Trudeau. So microphone number 1, please, to you.
Queen, Tony Wawari, Indigenous. Algonquin nin nino dakina nueri nishnare Algonquin nation gajunagudat kajun Wigwet shegi bijaye koma ugamak chogamak shamaganishik ikwe ketek ushkini got. Hello, my name is Tony Wawari. I'm the chief of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake, Indian Act Chief. Our customary system was forcibly taken away from us. And that's the issue that I have today. I come here with a strong heart and an open mind, despite the fact that I'm a survivor of colonizers, state settlers that continue to encroach and take away our lands. I ask my brothers and sisters and my ancestors to help me out, as I am going to be delivering a message here and to give a simple reminder of the relationship that we once had. I am Mjiganap Queenie. I am not a Quebecer. I am not a Canadian. I'm not an Indigenous person that we are being categorized as. We have our Unakunigewin, our customary laws that governed us since time immemorial. Truth and reconciliation, what does that mean? You've raped our people, you've raped our land, you stole our identity. You nearly wiped us out with the poison blanket that came across the seas, the poison blanket. We need to remind you, Prime Minister, and I have a language just like you. The British language talks about our wampum belt, and that's our treaty. I don't agree with the modern treaty self-government process. My rights are not for sale. My rights are not for sale, and I bring my drum here. That's the heartbeat of Mother Earth and the heartbeat of our nation. I come here with a good heart and an open mind, and I'm coming to be brief with that. Shamaganashik, Wagamak, the Tukwedi, Kaikidwan, Chimigwet and the Kit, My rights are not for sale. It'll never be for sale. Chimiwich. Oh.
Chimiwich, thank you very much. Last speaker, microphone number 2, please.
Miigwech Kabajaya, Prime Minister. Chief Dean Sayers. I am from the Crane clan. I'm Ojibwe. I'm from the Great Lakes. And I'm really honored to be able to speak for even a moment, if I could, and just remind you a little bit about some of the history that you're hearing here today. But I guess more succinctly, when we were in Whitehorse in 2013, I don't know if you remember, I had a chat with you there. And at that time, we had this discussion, and we were going to get together. And I wanted to take you up on that invitation to come and meet with you in Ottawa one of these days, or come to Sault Ste. Marie. I'd love to meet with you in Batchewana First Nation as well. But we do have some unfinished business that I'd really love to have a productive discussion with you in regards to what you inherited as Canada's Prime Minister and the honor of the Crown that came with our relationship that was struck, one of the relationships that was struck in 1850 with the Robinson-Huron Treaty. Just along that same vein, we've had some incredible discussions over the last decade or so in regards to the unresolved issues around the $4 a year, the annuity, our share of the wealth of the lands. And we went through ceremony together with your representatives, and not only yours, but Ontario's, and we went into sweats, and there's cross-cultural awareness, and our ancestors have accompanied us through that process, really a really beautiful process to try and find a resolve to the outstanding annuities issue. And we are getting close, and we've been really elated with where we are right now. I wanted to make sure that we can continue on that really beautiful path and find resolve sooner than later. So I just wanted to encourage you to please maybe refresh some of your discussions with some of your representatives and maybe provide them with whatever they need to be productive at these tables. So again, I want to thank you on behalf of my people, and I'm one of the spokespersons for the 21 bands that are part of the Robinson-Huron Treaty in Lake Superior area. So thank you so much, and I appreciate you being here with us today. Chimiwich Kabajaya. And I don't have a problem with my last 40 seconds for this guy, for this Gima Miigwech.
Chief James Marlowe from Tlutsuke, Northwest Territories. Just really, as I came all the way from Northwest Territories to ask Mr. Prime Minister for his help in regards to what the government of Northwest Territories has done to our people. They went into a cultural camp and raided the camp. A lifestyle we practiced for thousands of years. We went back to our homeland. We stayed there. The government of Northwest Territories came in and raided the camp looking for evidence of caribou being killed. So that's a huge issue on our people, elders, children, and people from all over the world. There's some people there. It's an international event, so I'm asking you for your help to help us. Was that recently? September. And your father has a relationship with our elders. Marcy Cho.
Can I take the two last speakers, or no? Okay. Thank you very, very much. So the discussion period is now closed. Thank you very much. No, I announced it just a bit earlier. But we have one online also. So, okay. So microphone number 1, can I ask you kindly to be very brief?
I'm going to have to very much shorten my answers then, but I want to hear from you, so please.
Number 1, please.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't want to have to stand here and beg. My name is Chief Annie Bernard Daisley. I'm from Wagamah First Nation. I'm only here for a few quick statements. You've heard a lot over the last few days, so I carry my ancestors as well, as we all should. My late grandfather, Chief John Basque of Bolodek First Nation, said, "How much land did you bring over on your boats anyways when you sailed over?" I had to give that ode to my grandfather. I also, thank you. I also want to say this. In June, I was in Ottawa. Here, I'm from Nova Scotia, and I went to meetings at Cernak and Isk. sitting around a table with people who make decisions on our lives, on our future, what comes to our communities. None of them sitting around a table knew our stats or the facts about the lives that we live. None on MMIWG, none on human trafficking, none on anything that affects our health or mental state in our communities. Why is that? I'm volunteering my time, Prime Minister, to come teach your staff. No sweat. I bet you will have an army of people coming to help me out as well. I have another idea, Prime Minister. How about investing in every First Nation community a youth center where we can grasp our youth at an early age to help them live a better life and have a better chance at life. And also provide program and service and dollars for every youth center across this nation. It's what's needed. If you really want to save our people, start with the youth. Thank you very much. Walalin.
Thank you very, very much. And if you can be very, very brief, I'll go to online Chief James Hobart from BC. Please, briefly, for a proper response from the Prime Minister.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. And Prime Minister, I'm hoping that you'll echo the Minister's words earlier to commit to an independent specific claims resolution center. Canada needs this. It's far too long that we've been looking for a place to house the work we're doing. Please, can you commit to this one thing? Thank you for me.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, to you.
Thank you. Very, very quickly, because I was glad to get those last voices heard. On documents, we are trying to release absolutely everything. We have scoured, we've gone through, we're pressing partners and religious leaders to release. I know in some questions there are privacy issues, but we're trying to release everything to the Centre for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg so that it can pass along all those things. But I understand how much it is important to know what happened to your loved ones, know what happened to your great aunts and great uncles and those children who were sent to residential schools who never returned. This is something that is a core part of truth before there can be healing. And that is something we are committed to do. We will continue to be there as partners to share absolutely everything we can and to ensure that partners and organizations, whether it's the Catholic Church or everything or anyone else, makes every effort to share and be accountable for the truth of what happened to far too many innocent children in residential schools when they were ripped from their families. And that goes to Chief Wawachi's comment. I hear you, Chief. I stand here as the representative of this country that has done so wrong by Indigenous peoples, by First Nations, by Inuit, by Métis, over generations, over centuries. The harm that was done in the breaking of treaties, in the assimilation and negation of culture, of language, of knowledge, the attempts to erase identity, the attempts to marginalize and murder the people who had been stewards of this land for time immemorial is not just something that is of the past. It is something that characterizes every single day in this country's life. The wrongs of the past echo strongly every day, not just for descendants and Indigenous peoples, but for all Canadians. We bear the responsibility of what has contributed to making modern Canada, and part of that is accepting the truth, the hard and painful truth of evils done to people who welcomed the original settlers, shared their knowledge, their abilities to make it through difficult seasons in this land, extended hands in friendship and agreement and partnership, to be betrayed attacked, and assimilated. Nothing any one government can do can undo all that. Nothing all the governments of the future, no matter how hard they try, will erase the past. But we can, in a very real way, recognize and accept that past, that is part of this country so many of us love so great today. But that's part